Hi everyone, and welcome to another crime and punishment story. This week I am covering the story of Henry Perkins and the senseless murder of Patrick Durkin in Newcastle Upon Tyne in 1905. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. There is very little early information about the life of either Henry or Patrick. It is quite rare, but despite extensive searching, I have not been able to find anything much about either man. Henry was born in around 1865. It is possible that he was born in Yorkshire and was said to be around 40 years old in 1905. He worked as a shoemaker in Walker. Like many people of the time, he was said to be a heavy drinker. It is not known if he was ever married or had any children, but at the time of the murder he was living in a lodging house in Newgate Street in Newcastle, where he shared a room with 3 other men. It was quite common for people to share small rooms like this, enabling the owners to make the maximum amount of money from their spare rooms. But of course this did not leave those who lived there with any privacy, and arguments would often linger for a long time, as was never any escape from the person that you did not get on with. Patrick Durkin was born in around 1876. During the trial it was stated that Henry had called him Irish, so we can only assume that he was born in Ireland from this information. He was said to be around 29 years old at the time of the murder. He worked as a bricklayer's labourer and, like Henry, was known to be quite fond of drinking. And just like Henry, it is not known if Patrick had ever been married or had any children. Patrick had been staying at the lodging house in Newgate Street for several months, and Henry had recently moved in. It is unclear if they had been on friendly terms in the beginning, but they had fallen out quite recently, and Henry seemed to hold a grudge against Patrick because of their argument. The lodging house was owned by a man named William Harris, and a lady by the name of Annie Jackson worked there as a cleaner, although in 1905 she was classed as a charwoman. Both were in the lodging house when Henry attacked Patrick. On the night of July the 13th, 1905, Patrick had been out drinking and returned to his lodgings and had gone to sleep on the settle by the fire. A settle, I guess, is best described as an early kind of sofa bed, in that it was a sofa during the daytime, usually made of simple wood, and that it could be turned into a bed for nighttime use. And I can honestly say that they do not look very comfortable, and they remind me a little of church pews. A little later that same evening, Henry also returned to the house. He too had been drinking, but he did not retire for the night. He sat close to Patrick and appeared to be restless, fiddling with something in his hands. When Annie Jackson asked him what he had, he claimed it was a newspaper, but she later stated it was clearly not a newspaper. She had believed from the start it was a shoemaker's knife that he had in his hands. Why he claimed it to be a newspaper is unknown, but perhaps in his drunken state it was the first thing that came to mind when he was asked. He suddenly moved towards Patrick in what appeared to be a threatening manner. Annie was able to pull him back and said, "Let him sleep." But she was clearly alarmed, as she immediately went in search of William Harris, and as she left the room she heard Patrick cry out. When she returned with Mr. Harris, Patrick was bleeding badly and Henry was heading out of the house. The two made no attempt to stop him. Instead, they attended to the wounds of Patrick Durkin and sent for the police and the doctor. The police were given a good description of Henry by both Annie and William. However, he had been gone for quite some time, so he was no longer in the immediate area. So all officers were informed to keep an eye out for him, and at this time he was wanted for unlawful wounding. Patrick Durkin was very seriously ill, and he was immediately taken to the Newcastle Infirmary at Forth Banks. He was said to have 2 wounds to his neck. One was quite superficial, but the other was deep, and although it had missed the main veins, he was still very ill and not able to talk to anyone about what had happened. The wound was described as being a dirty one, most likely due to the knife that had been used being a shoemaker's knife, and that the wounds already looked red and infected. Henry had gone to the home of the man he worked for, John Proctor, in Church Street in Walker, and it was when he was leaving here at around 2:30 a.m. that he was arrested by PC Wood for unlawfully wounding Patrick Durkin. Henry, when arrested, said that he had nothing to say to this. Patrick Durkin died at the infirmary on the 19th of July 1905. The charge against Henry was changed to that of wilful murder. At the inquest, it was stated that the 2 men had argued over money. Henry had claimed to have £4,000, which would have been a huge amount in 1905, and Patrick did not believe him. Henry did not like to be called a liar, and thus their argument began. On the 12th of July, Henry had made his first attempt to attack Patrick. They were said to have had a slight fist fight outside of the lodging house, and then Henry had tried to attack Patrick with a knife, but on this occasion he was dragged away from Patrick and nothing else happened that night, although Henry had been heard to tell Patrick that he would do for him. After this fight, William Harris had offered Henry another room away from Patrick, but he had declined, saying that he wished to stay in the same room. Although it appears that they had not spoken since the first fight, Henry was still in the same angry frame of mind, and when he saw Patrick the following night, it was said that he had attacked him without warning. Dr. Featherstone stated that Patrick had died from blood poisoning caused by the dirty knife used in the attack. He said that although he had improved slightly after first being brought into the infirmary, he had quickly deteriorated and was unable to give any details about the attack, having been unable to speak at all since his arrival. John Proctor of Church Street in Walker had employed Henry in his shop for around 2.5 years, and he knew him well. He said that Henry had visited him around 9 p.m. on the night of the murder and had told him, "I've stabbed a man and I am very sorry." John said he had also added, "You don't believe me. I'm afraid I have done it." John Proctor said he had not believed him, thinking it was just the drink talking, and he did not learn that it was the truth until the police had visited him later. He also stated that when not with drink, Henry was a very reliable, good, working man. James Healy, who had previously lodged at the same house as the 2 men, said he had spoken to Henry on the afternoon before the attack, and that he had shown him the knife and said that he planned to use this on Patrick Durkin. Walter Harris, the 16-year-old son of the lodging house owner, said he had seen Henry attack Patrick on the 12th of July and said he had been the one to twist his arm to make him drop the knife and allow Patrick to get away from him. He also said that Henry had told him that if he went to prison that he, Walter, could have any of his things that he wanted. William Harris said on the night of the crime he had found Patrick bleeding on the settle in the room he shared with Henry and the other 2 men. He saw Henry leave, and although he believed him to have been drinking, he did not think he was incapable with the drink. When addressing Henry, William Harris used the term Yorkie, telling Henry, "I am sorry, Yorkie, I have told the truth. I am very sorry to have to come here. I have lost 2 good lodgers who always paid their rent." The jury at the inquest very quickly returned a verdict of guilty of wilful murder against Henry Perkins, and he was committed for trial. The trial took place in mid-November of 1905. Henry pleaded not guilty. He had refused to tell the court or the guards at Newcastle Prison what part of the country he came from. He was clearly not from the Newcastle area originally, but he said that he did not wish his relatives to know about his arrest for murder or to know the outcome of his trial. However, I do have to say at this point that his family would have undoubtedly found out, as crimes of murder were reported in papers throughout the UK, and with his name in print they would have had some idea about his situation, though perhaps not until it was too late to visit him. Details of the actual trial are quite sparse. On the whole, it seems that the same evidence was given as that which was given at the inquest. There had been 4 murder trials taking place on the same day, and perhaps Henry's was not seen as being as interesting as the others, so very little was printed about it. From what I was able to find out, it seems that Henry had claimed he had only attacked Patrick as he believed he was about to attack him. Of course, this was disputed by Annie Jackson, who said Patrick was asleep at the time, but Henry claimed that as she had left the room to look for William Harris, Patrick had sat up and he feared he would attack him, so he had struck the first blow before he could. It was said that the argument over money had been the cause of the attack. Henry had not liked being called a liar, but the truth was he did not have the money he claimed at all. He was, in fact, living hand to mouth, and most of his money was spent on drinking. The defence suggested that this was a case of manslaughter and not premeditated murder. Henry had acted in a moment of anger and had not planned to kill Patrick. However, it would seem that the judge, in summing up, said that the men had previously fought and that Henry had said he would do for Patrick, and that he had returned to the house with a knife, making it hard to imagine that the murder, or the attack at the very least, had not been planned. The jury retired for a very short time before returning a verdict of guilty of wilful murder against Henry Perkins. The judge then sentenced him to death by hanging, and that his remains would be buried within the walls of Newcastle prison. When asked if he had anything to say to this, Henry replied by simply saying, "Thank you, my lord," before walking calmly from the dock. The execution date was set for December the 6th, 1905. The original executioner was to be a man by the name of Alan Taylor, who came from Newcastle. He had recently filled the vacancy left after the death of James Billington in 1901. The vacancy had not actually been filled until 1905. However, in the end, he would not do the job, and the executioner would be Pierpoint. I believe that this would have been Henry Pierpoint, as his brother Thomas was not working until 1906, and Albert was just a child. I was unable to find any details as to why Mr. Taylor did not do the job, so if anyone listening knows, do please let me know. There had been no recommendation for mercy, and no petition had been started to commute the sentence of death. This was quite unusual, as most cases, even when the crime had been quite brutal, a reprieve would be hoped for. Perhaps the lack of family or support in the area left no one willing to start a petition. Henry, it appears, had no visitors during his time in prison. His desire for his family not to know where he was and his lack of friends in the area would have been the main reason for this. He did, however, have regular visits from the prison chaplain. The prison chaplain stated that Henry was indeed sorry for the murder of Patrick Durkin, and that he had confessed to his crime before his execution. Interestingly, during the course of the trial, a man by the name of John Ruffton stated that Henry had confessed to him about a murder he had committed some 19 years previously in Kettering, stating that he had killed a man by the name of Osborne. This confession had taken place a couple of days prior to the attack on Patrick Durkin. The police had also received a letter from an unknown source stating that Henry Perkins was the murderer of Osborne. They had checked and found that he had been in the Kettering area at the time the crime was committed, and they felt it was most likely that he had been responsible for this murder as well. However, he was never charged, and the prison chaplain stated quite clearly that when asked just prior to his execution, he had completely denied any connection to the murder of Osborne. The night before the execution, Henry was said to have slept well and arose early and ate a light breakfast. He was said to be calm and did not appear distressed at the punishment he was about to receive. Shortly before 8 a.m. he was pinioned, which means that his arms would be tied at the wrists, and he was led to the scaffold. He was said to walk calmly and firmly with no need of assistance, and he also walked onto the drop without any help. The rope was adjusted and the white cap placed over his head. The sign was given and the bolt was removed, and Henry fell. His death was said to be instant. It was said that only a very small crowd had gathered outside of the prison to see the black flag flown to show that the punishment had been carried out as required by law. Only 3 members of the press had been allowed inside the prison to witness the execution. After the usual time of 1 hour, his body was removed and buried within the grounds of Newcastle Prison. Many of you will have heard me mention the felon's plot in All Saints Cemetery in other stories. This was a mass grave used to bury the remains of those who had previously been buried within the prison walls. When the prison was demolished in 1925, all but 4 bodies of the 15 buried there were found and moved to the new location. Henry was one of those who was reburied in the mass grave. It would seem that this was another sad case where an argument and too much drink had caused a fight that led to the loss of life of 2 men, one because of the dreadful attack and the other at the hands of the hangman. It seems crazy to me that a man would kill because he did not like to be called a liar, when he was indeed just that, as he had been telling a lie about the money that he had said he had, that he did not actually have. I hope you have found this sad and tragic story interesting. I thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.